Hi there, and welcome once again to Prices at the Pumps on the SaltWire Network. I'm Scott Squires. Pleased to be joined, as always, by Dan McTeague. And Dan, you're in Washington, D.C. today. We'll get to the why you're there in just a couple of minutes, but let's start with what most consumers want to know right away is, where are prices headed in this region, Maritimes, Atlantic Canada? What are you seeing?
Well, with the exception of Newfoundland, we saw New Brunswick and Nova Scotia use their so-called interrupter clauses and drive prices up about 7, in some instances 8 cents a liter for gasoline. Obviously, not as much for diesel, and so I think the damage is done, and we could actually start to see prices move down a little bit tomorrow. If there's any movement, it's because of what happened on energy markets yesterday. That, of course, being on Tuesday, where there was a bit of a back off, if you will, on the surging price of oil and gasoline going for the ride. So we are expecting perhaps a half penny decrease for diesel and for gasoline, best case scenario. Also likely is no change at all. So nothing to really get worried about. Next week, however, I think we're going to be in a very different situation in which we are likely to see prices move up, both because of energy markets now realizing and having to bake in another 1.1 barrels a day that removed from by OPEC, as well as the switch from winter to summer gasoline. Those two factors alone could see prices move up and firm up perhaps by another 2 or 3 cents a liter a week Friday.
Dan, we have a lot of folks that listen to the Prices at the Pumps podcast and also watch the video version right here on the SaltWire Network. And I actually had a question submitted to me by one of the viewers, Aaron in Cole Harbour, wanted me to ask you where you see home heating prices going short-term, long-term.
Short-term for our friend in Cole Harbour, as for the entire eastern coast, the eastern seaboard, will be a decrease for home heating fuel as we get to warmer weather for obvious reasons. But a proxy, or if you will, a cousin to home heating fuel is in fact jet fuel, diesel, and those prices are going to continue to see upward pressure as demand continues to rise, especially during the summer months. So the irony is that while weather may indicate prices should go down, and they will moderate, pushing that price back up will be jet fuel costs, which last I noted yesterday had increased about 2 or 3 cents a liter. And so this push-pull means that prices will temper a little bit, but not like we've expected in the past, where as we get warmer weather, prices should drop dramatically. They won't, and they will stay there for quite some time. Of course, on July 1st, we see the carbon tax increase for most of Atlantic Canada. That will mean, of course, a net increase of over 4.4 cents a liter for diesel, home heating fuel, and other products. So at that same day, we also see the clean fuel standard coming in. Although it would not apply to non-motive diesel, it still means that we could start to see the blending of ethanol and other factors contributing to its price stability or price increase. So bottom line, don't expect much, maybe a little bit of reprieve, but nothing to write home about.
Thanks, Dan, and we thank Aaron for submitting that question. And, you and I like to talk about a lot of the things that are happening on the global stage geopolitically that can certainly affect markets and affect what we're paying for home heating fuel and prices at the pumps here in our region. Is there anything right now that's making your ears perk up or catching your attention that is happening on the world stage that could affect us here?
I think OPEC's fed up with the Biden administration and their willingness to abuse things like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, lose their minds over, banking crisis, and then their Energy Secretary Granholm saying, "Hey, we're not going to buy back some of that oil that we've foolishly gotten rid of to try to control prices." I think OPEC has sent a very strong message that they believe fundamentals have to be respected, and that the short sellers, and you and I have talked about this, Scott, for the past few sessions, the short sellers are going to finally get burned. The people who are trying to play the game and drive the price of energy down, despite demand and supply being tight, demand being strong, are going to get badly burnt, because I don't think OPEC's dropped the other shoe. It's also a demonstration to which North America and Europe have walked away from hydrocarbons, and as a result, we've become far more vulnerable. OPEC now controls the price, not the ESG and woke capitalists in North America, who are doing everything they can to hogtie a resource that's important not just for our well-being, but also for global stability.
Something else, you and I talk about as well is how things on the geopolitical stage or in other countries can affect us here in North America, and in particular Canada, even though we may not realize. And while this isn't brand new breaking news, I thought it was something that I bring to you and talk about today is, hearing some rumblings and rumors, some big media outlets in the United States have covered this, as well as here in Canada, is the potential that a big player in the oil market, Saudi Arabia, could potentially start dealing their oil or trading for their oil in Chinese currency. Right now, it's in the American dollar, the greenback as it's known. But if that switch were to come, how could that affect us here?
Well, switch is coming because there is a new emerging order, and it's driven to a large extent by our fixation with trying to hogtie energy. Energy has been not only the means by which we have enjoyed security and a higher standard of living, it's now being compromised. And I think countries like China, Russia, India are getting on with the idea that they don't need the American currency. And why would they? The Americans seem to be like Canadians, spending money with abandon, money they don't have, and financing a lot of these wishful thinking, pie in the sky ideas on renewables and others. So a good part of the world is now saying enough with North America, enough with Europe. You can have your sanctions. You can do what you want. We're going to take our marbles and go somewhere else, and we'll trade in our currency. But it has enormous implications for debt-laden countries like Canada and, of course, like the United States, in the sense that what we're seeing here, and I think it makes a lot of, it has to, have the attention of all Canadians, is that if such a move were to take place, the inflationary effect would be dramatic, and worse for Canadians, of course, because we have a Canadian dollar that trades at a 1/3 discount to the value of the US dollar. Inflation would be out of control. And we're talking, for historians, we're talking, German Weimar Republic inflation. If that were to happen, the United States were knocked off, or its, its status as the global reserve currency would have enormous implications. And a lot of people asking how the heck we're going to pay all this debt down that we've accumulated just so we can grift.
And this may be going down a bit of a political rabbit hole, and I don't want to go too far down there, but as someone who's been so experienced in the energy sector and kind of reading the tea leaves on a global scale to see how things, will affect the price of energy and home heating fuel and gasoline and diesel and all those things, do you see anything that potentially the United States and their leadership could do to perhaps stem this tide? Or is it, as you've kind of laid out, we've passed that point of no return? What are your thoughts on it?
It's deeply ingrained in the psyche of most that somehow we're bad and the rest of the world is good. The rest of the world wants to achieve our standard of living. To do that, they're going to use more fossil fuels. To do that, they're going to build our electric cars and our batteries. And they're not subsidizing. These are, very significant moves towards ensuring that the future of energy is one that is provides more plentiful opportunities for people to enjoy the benefits that we've been taking for granted. I think we're at a crossroads where we are going to have to start to recognize that if we don't begin to nourish and cherish the things that have made us unique and very prosperous, especially given our cold climate, things like our natural gas, things like our oil, things like our mineral resources. If we don't recognize what we're doing right now, and of course dismiss the sort of Santa Claus fairy tale that's out there, that we can somehow wish all these things away and turn our economy into solar panels, EVs, and of course windmills, all made in China, then I think we're heading towards a road to economic perdition, the likes of which we will not be able to recover very well, especially here in Canada.
And certainly there's a lot of topics that can be very polarizing in the public, and talking about energy and fossil fuels and green initiatives can certainly be polarizing. And I know you and I have talked before about your detractors, or those who may think that you've got a certain agenda. I think it's important to give you that opportunity again to just kind of lay out why it is that you talk about the importance of what needs to be done in terms of Canadian energy and what those policies should be. But again, just for those of you who kind of lay it out there and say, oh, Dan is just all about the oil industry and he just wants nothing but oil and be done with everything else, what would you say? What do you say?
Well, I mean, the reality is what they're offering, the paradigm shift they're talking about is unrealistic, and it will lead to consequences the likes of which no one can afford. And at the end of the day, what they're looking for is depopulation. I've mentioned this many times. Don't take my word for it. Reuters magazine, others have talked about Reuters story talks about the fact that, you got 12,000 scientists who penned their name back in 2019 saying we need depopulation as a means of bringing climate under control. As opposed to seeing the public as a problem and a menace, I tend to look at this from the perspective of the flourishing of our status of living, our standard of living, our enjoyment of life, having been provided by fossil fuels. Folks, there is no other alternative, and it is fundamentally dishonest to suggest, on the one hand, that the science is suggesting that somehow the world is coming to an end. I've heard this garbage for years. I worked with a guy named Morris Strong, who was the granddaddy of this stuff way back when the same kind of epithets were delivered. Look, we have to be responsible, but the way you're responsible is to make sure that things like Canadian natural gas, Canadian know-how, Canadian technology, our ESG rankings, which are the highest per barrel of oil, is in fact sent to markets, and that we provide the world a better way. But we're not going to do it by being dishonest with people and saying windmills, solar panels, and EVs are somehow a good thing in of themselves. None of them, by the way, can be produced without fossil fuels. So I think we need to take a bit of a step back. I know we've had 20 years of indoctrination to a lot of people and can't think outside the box. But I'll tell you what, in Nova Scotia, if you shut down all your natural gas, your propane, your oil, your heating fuel, how's your society going to survive? It can't. And I think we have to have a long, strong adult discussion about the importance of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because if you do that, you better be prepared to live the state of nature, eating acorns, wearing animal skins, but no fires, because of course that would be increasing your carbon footprint.
I appreciate the fact that you're always willing to have an upfront and honest debate about this topic and about all things surrounding it, whether or not somebody agrees with you or not. So that's certainly appreciated. Now, I mentioned off the top that you're right now down in Washington, D.C. What are you doing down in Washington, Dan?
Working with a lot of organizations on best practices for North America. Energy security is extremely important for North America, and we've lost our way, at least since 2014. We've taken it for granted. And working here with like-minded, non-partisan people to say, look, we may have differences, but we have to recognize that our ability to trade energy, to work with each other, and I don't just mean oil and gas, hydro, propane, and even new technologies are all important. We have to have the best practices. There's a lot that Canadians can provide. I'm doing this on my own dime, by the way, and meeting with a lot of like-minded people I've worked with over the years on energy, especially my old days working both public relations with Toyota Canada, and of course, many years down here with Gas Buddy, providing Americans with insights into energy and how important it is. So I think they get the message, especially given the trillions of dollars that the Biden administration is prepared to spend, much of it borrowed for the Inflation Reduction Act. This will not produce a tectonic shift, but it will, in fact, lead Americans down a road that I think many of them are unfamiliar with, that Canadians have experienced: high inflation and a lower standard of living.
Dan, we certainly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, in particular today with all that you've got going on with what you just explained there in Washington. But when you're not with us here on the SaltWire Network, where can folks reach out to you, find you, and follow you?
Yeah, well, of course, gas price predictions, when the regulators aren't making their own minds as to when they're going to change prices, is gaswizard.ca. And of course, my thoughts on blogs, when I have time to write, it's almost a one-man show sometimes, is found at affordableenergy.ca. But more importantly, these longer discussions about where I'm at can happen right here every week here on the SaltWire Network with you, Scott.
Well, we appreciate your input and your expertise, Dan. And again, it looks like you're in a locker room there, wherever you are. But again, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. So where exactly are you right now? It does look like you're in a locker room, Dan.
Yeah, I'm actually in an intern center here at an organization that has been working for years on the subject of natural gas. So this is kind of a tiny little room, but I don't see any interns here. It's obviously the Holy Week, so happy Easter to everybody.
Dan, we appreciate your time. Safe travels back to Ontario tomorrow. Have a great weekend. Happy Easter to you and to all that celebrate. And we'll look forward to doing this again next week.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Dan.